The Iranian Consulate General in India posted 3 words on the morning of May 10, 2026. We shot it down. The post appeared on social media within minutes of civilian flight tracking data, briefly showing an F-35A Lightning II over the Gulf of Oman, squawking 17,700, turning hard toward UAE airspace, and then going completely dark as the transponder switched off. By the time the post was live, the Iranian state media apparatus had assembled its full narrative around the emergency code. Project Freedom is collapsing. America is hiding losses. The most advanced fighter jet in the world has been defeated by the Islamic Republic's air defense forces. Here is what actually happens in a fighter cockpit when a pilot takes genuine battle damage, severe enough to threaten aircraft survival in an active combat environment. He does not reach up and broadcast his position to every radar facility, every military tracking system, and every civilian flight tracking service in the region by squawking 7700. Squawking 7700 is the specific aviation procedure for declaring an emergency through the air traffic control system. It flags your transponder return on every radar display in your airspace, asks for priority handling, and announces to everyone monitoring that your aircraft has a problem and needs immediate landing access. It is the procedure you use when you need air traffic control to clear a path and you need to land without friction. It is not the procedure you use when you are taking battle damage from Iranian weapons in contested airspace, and your priority is surviving the threat environment before worrying about landing procedures. A combat-damaged pilot exits the threat environment at maximum speed using secure communications to brief his flight lead in his base. He does not light himself up on Flight Radar 24 like a signal flare in a dark room. The operational logic is elementary, and it tells you with absolute certainty what kind of emergency this was. A mechanical issue? An avionics fault? One of the equipment anomalies that a fifth-generation aircraft operated at the pace of continuous combat operations over 73 days will periodically produce. Because maintenance cycles compress under operational tempo, because avionics systems accumulate faults that peacetime inspection intervals would catch before they become emergencies, because an air war at this scale stresses every component of every aircraft in the fleet in ways that the original design specifications did not specifically model for. The pilot declared the emergency. He turned toward UAE airspace. He got his aircraft on the ground at Dhafra Air Base, the primary U.S. Air Force operational hub in the theater. The transponder went dark when he entered UAE airspace on approach to the base, following the standard operational security procedure that military aircraft use at operational bases during combat operations, to avoid advertising their position and approach heading to systems that can read civilian transponder data. Standard procedure. Textbook. Completely unrelated to Iranian fire. The Consulate General in India who posted "We shot it down" was not making an intelligence assessment. He was running an information operation targeted at an Iranian domestic audience that the information blackout has isolated from the operational record of the past 73 days, the record that shows 7 fast attack boats sunk, 3 major tankers disabled, 551 ballistic missiles, and 2,000 drones intercepted by UAE air defenses alone, drone launch sites and coastal missile batteries and radar installations destroyed across multiple Hormuz province locations, and the American carrier strike groups conducting unimpeded operations from Gulf of Oman positions that no Iranian system has been able to threaten effectively throughout the entire conflict. For that domestic audience, "We shot it down" is the institutional performance of continued resistance. For anyone with access to the operational record, it is the specific kind of claim that requires no refutation beyond the question it cannot answer. If your air defense systems are shooting down F-35s, why did the pilot have the operational leisure to reach up and squawk 7700? Stay with this. Because May 11th, 2026 is the day that diplomatic architecture that has been containing this conflict within the framework of potential resolution has collapsed. Not frayed, not strained, not paused for recalibration, but collapsed. Trump called the Iranian counterproposal totally unacceptable. And an Iranian oil ministry official told the New York Times this week that the oil storage system is approximately 40 days from running out completely, with some well closures potentially permanent after that threshold is reached. 40 days. The engineering countdown that the satellite imagery and the preemptive output cuts and the Karg Island 45 square kilometer oil slick had been pointing toward for weeks has now been assigned its specific number by an Iranian government official in a statement to an international newspaper. Not a projection model, not an analytical estimate, a figure from inside the ministry responsible for managing the system that is running out. Begin with the counterproposal that produced its own immediate rejection, because what Iran demanded is the document that tells you more precisely than any military engagement or any diplomatic communique the specific institutional calculation the IRGC has made about its own leverage and its own survival requirements. Iran demanded war reparations, direct financial compensation from the United States for the military operations that destroyed Iranian naval assets, degraded Iranian air defense infrastructure, disabled Iranian tankers, and enforced the blockade that has been costing the regime $500 million per day for 73 days. The United States bombed Iranian military facilities. Iran's position is that the United States should pay Iran for having done so. The logic of this demand is visible only from within an institutional framework that has concluded it must perform maximum defiance, regardless of what that performance costs diplomatically. Because any appearance of accepting responsibility for initiating the sequence of events that produced the bombing would undermine the domestic narrative that the IRGC depends on for its continued political authority. Iran demanded full sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. The strait is 21 miles wide at its navigable minimum. International maritime law establishes a 12 nautical mile territorial waters limit from any nation's coastline. Iran's coastline does not extend to the middle of the strait. The legal framework governing passage rights through the Strait of Hormuz, the right of transit passage established in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, applies specifically to international straits used for international navigation, and it does not include any provision by which a bordering nation can claim exclusive sovereignty over the entire waterway. Iran's demand is not a legal position. It is the institutional assertion that the Islamic Republic should be the toll operator of the world's most important energy transit corridor, that ships should require Iranian permission to transit, that Iran should determine who pays and how much, and that the international community should accept this arrangement as the new normal. Every government watching this negotiation in every region that depends on Strait of Hormuz transit for its energy security understood exactly what this demand represented, not a negotiating position that can be bridged through creative drafting. A demand that would require the international community to accept a precedent for national control of international waterways that every major seafaring nation has spent decades building institutional frameworks to prevent. Iran demanded sanctions relief and the unfreezing of assets, the full reversal of the economic pressure architecture that took years to build through coordinated American and international action. Iran demanded all of this while explicitly refusing to address the 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that the International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed Iran is sitting on. This is uranium that is a short technical step away from weapons-grade material. Iran refused to negotiate this. Iran refused to negotiate the ballistic missile program. Iran refused to negotiate the proxy network. The counterproposal offered two things in exchange for everything: the cessation of current hostilities and the assertion that Iran is the aggrieved party that deserves compensation for being attacked. Trump called it totally unacceptable. The analysis of anyone who has been following this conflict since February 28th would have used the same words. Now, let us talk about what the F-35 was actually doing over the Gulf of Oman, because the ISR mission that the aircraft was executing before its mechanical emergency is operationally more important than any Iranian propaganda claim about its fate. The F-35A carries sensor capabilities that are in a different operational category from any other tactical aircraft in any theater. The AN/APG-81 active electronically scanned array radar is the most capable multimode sensor system ever installed in a tactical aircraft, operating simultaneously in air-to-air engagement mode, synthetic aperture radar ground mapping mode, maritime surface search mode, and electronic attack mode, with the ability to switch between them in milliseconds based on the mission's evolving requirements. The electro-optical targeting system provides a forward-looking infrared and daylight television capability with identification ranges that make it competitive with dedicated intelligence collection platforms in many scenario types. The distributed aperture system provides 360-degree infrared coverage through 6 cameras stitched around the airframe, feeding the pilot's helmet display a complete spherical picture of the threat environment that does not require maneuvering the aircraft to point a sensor at a specific direction. And the electronic surveillance measure system passively collects electromagnetic signals across a broad frequency range, building a radio frequency picture of the operational environment without emitting any energy that adversary receivers can detect. That sensor combination, integrated through the mission systems architecture that the F-35 program spent 15 years refining, makes the aircraft uniquely valuable for the specific collection requirement that has become the highest priority intelligence task in this conflict: finding where the IRGC is hiding its fast attack boats, its coastal missile systems, and its command and control infrastructure before those assets can be employed in the next operational window. The 130 speedboats and 2 formations that Iran released satellite imagery of on May 10th are not permanent fixtures of the Strait's surface. They move. They are maintained somewhere. They are fueled somewhere. Their crews are briefed and staged somewhere. The warehouses, the natural coves, the hardened underground shelters, the camouflage netting over coastal boat storage facilities along 120 kilometers of Iranian coastline, all of those locations are discoverable through the persistent overhead collection that the F-35's sensor suite is optimized to provide. The F-35, flying at operational altitude over the Gulf of Oman with its APG-81 radar and synthetic aperture ground mapping mode, can produce imagery of the coastal terrain with resolution sufficient to identify boat-sized objects under camouflage netting. Its EOTS can detect the thermal signatures of recently operated boat engines that retain heat even after the engines are shut down and the boats are hidden. Its ESM system is cataloging every electromagnetic emission along the coast, the command and control radios, the search radars, the communications links, that tells targeting analysts where the coordination nodes are that make the swarm operable as a force rather than as individual uncoordinated hulls. The NOR 802 coastal missile is the specific threat that makes this collection mission dangerous as well as important. The NOR is Iran's domestically produced variant of the Chinese C-802 anti-ship cruise missile, a sea-skimming weapon with a range of approximately 120 kilometers that approaches its target at wave-top altitude in a profile that presents a genuine interception challenge to Aegis-equipped surface combatants because the low flight profile limits the radar's look-down angle geometry. Iran has deployed NOR systems in mobile configurations along its coastline, and the ongoing strike campaign has addressed confirmed positions, but cannot guarantee comprehensive coverage without the continuous collection that identifies new positions as the batteries are repositioned. The F-35's coastal surveillance missions are the collection architecture that closes that gap. Not perfectly, not instantaneously, but persistently, and with the sensor resolution that makes the identification and cataloging of mobile coastal missile positions achievable in a way that older ISR platforms could not support at the level of precision the targeting requires. Iran's air defense threat picture as of May 11, 2026, requires the honest analytical engagement that neither dismissal nor inflation serves. Dismissal produces operational surprises. Inflation serves Iranian information operations. The accurate picture falls between them and is important for understanding what the F-35's ISR missions are operating against. The high-end integrated air defense systems that Iran spent decades acquiring and deploying have been substantially degraded. The S-300 PMU-2 batteries that represented the most capable radar-guided surface-to-air missile systems in Iran's inventory have been addressed by the CD campaign that has been running since February 28th. The Dhafra 373, Iran's domestically produced variant designed to approximate S-300 performance with domestically manufactured components, has been similarly targeted. The F-16CJ Wild Weasel aircraft carrying AGM-88 HARM missiles, combined with the EA-18G Growler jamming support that creates the electromagnetic environment the HARM needs to prosecute its engagement, have been systematically working through Iran's radar-guided air defense architecture. The operational record of the strike packages that have reached their targets in Bandar Abbas, Qeshm Island, and multiple Hormuzgan province locations confirms that the radar-guided threat is substantially suppressed, because strike aircraft that were reaching their targets at high-value locations would not have been doing so if effective radar-guided surface-to-air missile systems had been operational in those areas. The residual threat is fundamentally different in character and requires different countermeasures. Iran's adaptation to the CAD campaign has been to go low technology, mobile, and passive, deploying systems that do not emit the radar energy that HARM missiles home on, and that SEED doctrine is organized to defeat. The Majid system, designated AD-08 by Western intelligence, is the specific capability that represents this adaptation most completely. It was publicly revealed at a military parade in April 2021. It mounts on mobile RS-2 tactical vehicles, wheeled platforms that can reposition rapidly, that can drive to elevated terrain, and use the geographic altitude to extend their effective engagement ceiling beyond what flat ground deployment would achieve, and that leave no radar emission footprint that overhead collection or HARM missiles can track to their position. The engagement envelope is 5 to 7 nautical miles in range and approximately 2 to 3 nautical miles altitude ceiling from sea level, roughly 18,000 feet under standard conditions. A Majid battery positioned at 7,000 feet elevation on the Zagros mountain terrain that overlooks the Gulf of Oman extends its effective engagement ceiling to approximately 25,000 feet. That altitude range encompasses the standard mission profiles of tactical aircraft, conducting coastal surveillance, strike ingress, and post-strike egress over Iranian territory. The engagement envelope is real and cannot be dismissed simply because it is shorter range than the high-end S-300 systems that CD has addressed. The guidance system is the operationally decisive characteristic. The Majid does not emit radar energy. It uses passive electro-optical and infrared imaging guidance, thermal sensors, and optical sensors that track the aircraft through its heat signature and visual profile without broadcasting any electromagnetic signal that the aircraft's radar warning receiver is designed to detect. The F-35's electronic surveillance measure system passively monitors a broad frequency spectrum for hostile emissions. It finds nothing from the Majid because the Majid is not emitting anything. The AN/APG-81 radar can detect a great many things, but it is not primarily configured to detect a passive imaging seeker sitting on a hillside, waiting for a thermal target to enter its field of view. The stealth that makes the F-35 invisible to radar-guided systems does not defeat a system that is looking at the aircraft thermally rather than electromagnetically. Your radar cross-section management cannot reduce the infrared signature of your engine exhaust to zero the way it can manage the electromagnetic reflectivity of your airframe geometry. This is the specific vulnerability that the analysis of this conflict has been documenting through the earlier confirmed F-35A hit. The aircraft that was struck during the early phase of the conflict, whose pilot made an emergency landing and is in stable condition, whose specific damage source has not been officially confirmed, but that multiple analysts have attributed to the Majid or a similar passive infrared system. Whether the damage was from the Majid itself, from a similar passive system whose existence is not publicly documented, or from shrapnel debris falling from intercepted ballistic missiles, a genuine hazard that combat pilots in this theater have reported, describing the airspace during peak engagement periods as looking like the sky is falling with molten debris from the intercepts. The operational lesson is consistent. Iran has a passive air defense capability that conventional CAD doctrine does not address, and that stealth's primary mechanism does not defeat. The Chinese dimension of this capability is the intelligence thread that the cargo flights arriving from China must be assessed against. If China has been providing Iran with upgraded electro-optical sensor packages for its passive air defense systems, a capability transfer that would not require the delivery of radar-emitting hardware that American collection systems could detect, the 8 unmarked wide-body aircraft spotted over Zanjan on May 8th may have been carrying exactly this category of upgrade. Passive sensor software, improved infrared tracking algorithms, optical sensor packages with longer detection ranges. None of these are weapons that would appear obviously military in cargo manifests or overhead imagery. All of them would meaningfully extend the operational effectiveness of the Majid and similar systems against the F-35s that are conducting the coastal ISR missions. The Artesh dimension of the internal Iranian fracture is the development that the international analytical community has been underweighting relative to its potential operational significance. The Artesh, the Islamic Republic of Iran Army, the conventional military force that predates the Islamic Revolution and traces its institutional identity to the Imperial Iranian Army of the Shah's era, is a parallel institution to the IRGC with separate command chains, separate budget allocations, and a historically different institutional culture that has never fully embraced the revolutionary ideology that defines the IRGC's organizational identity. Reports from frontline units during the initial conflict phase describe Artesh soldiers being deployed to exposed positions with approximately 10 rounds of ammunition each, positioned in areas where IRGC commanders were using them as cannon fodder, as screening forces whose purpose was to absorb initial engagement while IRGC units were positioned differently. 10 bullets, sent to die, by the organization that controls the oil revenue and the institutional loyalty payments. The Artesh officers and enlisted personnel who experienced or witnessed this treatment are not processing it as a temporary operational decision made under combat pressure. They are processing it as the definitive institutional communication of what the IRGC believes the Artesh is worth, and their assessment of that communication is informing a loyalty calculation that the economic deterioration of the blockade is simultaneously pressuring from a completely separate direction. When the oil revenue stops flowing and the IRGC cannot fund the loyalty payments that maintain its network of institutional support, when the lower-level commanders who have been receiving their monthly allocations see zeros in their accounts, the Artesh soldiers and officers who were already processing the 10 bullets cannon fodder communication have one more reason to revise their loyalty calculation in a direction that does not favor the IRGC's political survival. Institutional fractures in authoritarian systems do not produce dramatic announced defections in their early stages. They produce the behavioral drift of units that find reasons not to execute the specific orders that would require them to take actions against the population or against other institutions whose alignment with the emerging alternative is more attractive than continued service to the declining incumbent. The Charles de Gaulle's confirmed position in the Red Sea approaching the Gulf of Aden, with the French Ministry of Defense publicly stating that the carrier group is positioning for a possible freedom of navigation operation in the Strait of Hormuz, is the coalition development that changes the diplomatic and operational picture in a specific way, beyond the addition of another carrier's air wing to the theater's aviation assets. France's presence represents the formal entry of a major NATO European power into the active enforcement coalition. Not advisory, not logistical, not expressed through diplomatic statements, while maintaining operational distance from the actual blockade enforcement. The Charles de Gaulle is the French Republic committing combat power to a position from which it can contribute to exactly the operations that Iran's deputy foreign minister threatened would be met with immediate and decisive response. The coalition arithmetic that Iran has been trying to fracture through the appeal to European neutrality, through the characterization of American operations as unilateral military adventurism that peace-loving European nations should distance themselves from through the F-35 propaganda designed to suggest American losses, has been running in the opposite direction from what Iran's strategy required. Every Iranian attack on European-flagged or European-owned shipping has produced a European government that is less neutral than it was before the attack. The CMA-CGM San Antonio strike moved France from cautious neutrality toward active military positioning. The Ocean Khoi seizure moved China from studied silence toward public criticism. The systematic targeting of Gulf partner infrastructure has converted every Gulf government into an active participant in the enforcement architecture. The coalition is growing, not shrinking, and the French carrier represents its most visible recent addition. China's concurrent South China Sea intensification, the PLA Navy spy ship operating inside the West Philippine Sea during U.S.-Philippine Balikatan 2026 exercises, is the simultaneous chess move that every American operational planner managing the Pacific dimension of the current global military posture is tracking against the Iran operational picture. Beijing is collecting intelligence on American and Philippine military capabilities during live exercises, while American forces are at their highest operational tempo in the Persian Gulf since the Cold War. The specific intelligence being collected, how American naval and aviation systems perform under realistic operational conditions, what the integration architecture between American and partner forces looks like in practice, what the response times and coordination procedures are for various threat categories, is exactly the information Chinese military planning for Taiwan contingency scenarios requires most urgently. China is not wasting the operational window that the American focus on the Persian Gulf has created. Its spy ship in the West Philippine Sea is the evidence that Beijing understands the intelligence value of the current moment and is extracting every bit of it. The U.S. Army's directed energy laser fielding announcement is the capability development that changes the long-term operational economics of drone warfare in a way that makes the entire Iranian drone strategy self-defeating on a long enough timeline. The cost asymmetry that has been making Iranian drone operations economically favorable, $20,000 to $30,000 per drone, against hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars per interceptor missile, is the specific calculation that directed energy eliminates. A vehicle-mounted high-power laser that recharges at the speed of electricity and costs less than $1 per shot is not competing economically with Iranian drones. It is ending the competition. Every Shahed 136 that costs $20,000 and is destroyed by a laser that costs less than $1 to fire represents a reversal of the cost asymmetry that has been Iran's primary economic warfare mechanism. The system is in early fielding, not full deployment. It is not yet in this theater in the numbers that would immediately change the operational picture, but its existence, its confirmed fielding timeline, and its specific application to the counter-drone mission that this conflict has made the dominant tactical requirement for Gulf partner air defense are the signals that the Iranian drone strategy is operating on borrowed time against a technological solution that is entering production precisely because this conflict made the requirement undeniable. The four-dimensional chess picture for the next operational phase is the analysis that the collapsed ceasefire talks and the 40-day countdown make not speculative but urgent. The targeting package being assembled by the F-35 coastal ISR missions is the prerequisite collection that the comprehensive fast attack boat strike requires. The 130 speedboats in two formations, the Ghadir submarines, the coastal missile batteries, the command and control nodes, all of them have physical locations that the persistent collection is mapping at increasing precision. When the map is complete, the B-52s and B-1Bs operating from Diego Garcia, the F-15Es carrying GBU-72 advanced penetrating weapons against hardened underground storage, the A-10 Warthogs that have been demonstrating their effectiveness against exactly this target category throughout the conflict. These platforms can address the fast attack boat fleet at the logistics layer rather than one boat at a time in open water. The specific strike architecture that the collected intelligence enables is categorically more comprehensive than any individual engagement the conflict has produced to this point. Finding every cove, warehouse, underground shelter, fuel depot, and maintenance facility where the IRGC is staging its fast attack fleet, and then delivering B-52 saturation bombing and F-15E precision strikes against all of them simultaneously. In the 40-day window before the oil storage overflows and the forced well shutdowns cascade through the economic system, is the operational combination that the Iranian military cannot adapt to faster than the strikes are arriving. You cannot reposition 130 boats to new locations faster than the persistent ISR collection is mapping their new locations. You cannot rebuild the command and control infrastructure that coordinates the swarm faster than precision strikes are eliminating it. The targeting package is the key. The F-35 squawking 7700 was building it. Trump's totally unacceptable characterization of the counterproposal is the diplomatic confirmation that the one way or the other has resolved in favor of the other. The way that produces the agreement has been exhausted, not by lack of American effort or insufficient diplomatic engagement or failure of the Qatari and Pakistani intermediary channels, but by the specific institutional incapacity of the IRGC to accept the terms that make any agreement permanent rather than temporary. An institution that demands war reparations and sovereignty over an international waterway while refusing to negotiate the 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium does not have a negotiating position. It has a domestic political performance requirement that it is conducting in the language of diplomatic communication. Totally unacceptable is Trump's response to performance rather than negotiation. And the bombs that follow a totally unacceptable diplomatic characterization from this specific administration come at a higher level and intensity than before. The 40-day clock, the collapsed talks, the F-35 ISR missions building the targeting package, the MV Ocean Trader in the Indian Ocean, Space Force watching Isfahan at badge number precision, the Charles de Gaulle in the Red Sea, the coalition growing at exactly the moment Iran needs it to fracture. The Artesh soldiers who went to the front with 10 bullets assessing their institutional loyalty, the IRGC commanders fighting over the last crumbs of an oil revenue that is 40 days from complete exhaustion. The consulate general posted, "We shot it down and sat back, satisfied with the information operation." The pilot who squawked 7700 was already on the ground at Al Dhafra, talking to his maintenance crew about the fault that triggered the emergency, completely unaware that an Iranian diplomat had just declared his emergency landing a combat victory. The targeting package he was building before the fault occurred is one day closer to completion. The 40 days are counting down. The totally unacceptable answer has been delivered, and the bombers from Diego Garcia are already calculating their fuel loads. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because May 11th, 2026 is the day the analytical framework of this conflict transitioned from will the talks succeed to the talks have failed and what comes next. The 40-day number is not a projection. It is a cited figure from inside the Iranian oil ministry. The totally unacceptable characterization is not diplomatic posturing. It is the specific language that precedes the next operational phase. The F-35 was not shot